A very good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to every one of you from different parts of the world. We have people dialing in from US, we have people dialing from Europe, we have people dialing in from Africa, Middle East, and Asia. So a very good morning, afternoon, and evening, whichever time that is applicable for you. So I'm very glad to be a moderator for this session, talking about people's strategy in the VUCA world. So I'm very glad to have with me four other panelists. Unfortunately, we have one who is unable to join us because she needs to attend to really a last minute family matters. But it's okay. What happened is we'll still go ahead. The show will still go on. And right now, I'm going to do a very quick introduction of the panelists. So I'm going to share the screen. We have agreed to do something a little bit more interesting. So let me show the screen. Okay, so the first person that I'm going to share is actually wait, give me a minute. Let me redo. I think I got the wrong deck. Okay, can you all see my screen right now?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to very quickly talk about the different panelists. So from the screen, you are able to see that this is the introduction of Bushan. I'm not going to go into too much detail about him because we agree that you are going to link up with them through linking and going to find out more about them individually. So, but these are some of the very interesting slides about him. He's an athlete, okay, and he loves a lot of activity, and he has been based in many places in the region. So the next one we'll show about Laura, and she is from Las Vegas. So she's a very exciting lady, and we'll hear a little bit more about her from herself later on. The third person, we have somebody from Malaysia in Asia together with me. He just across the border to Singapore. So this is Lawrence, and he has shown himself to be at many places in Asia and also across to the different region. And one of the very interesting thing is he loves durian. So durian is actually known as the king of fruits. So many of you may not like it, but this is something that is very delicious to even myself as well. So lastly, we have a very beautiful lady. And every time when we check over the phone, over Zoom, we always see her kitchen, and she is based in Sweden. So this is something very interesting about her with her two children. So this is a very quick introduction of us. So I will stop sharing the introduction, and I will go straight into our discussion. So for the start, to share with you how we're going to do it is, I'm going to start with a group question and getting the input from the four other panelists. And then after that, what I'll do is I will ask individual panelists some questions, and hopefully we get some insights from them. And then we'll allocate about half an hour so that we get the participants. You can drop your question in the chat box, and then I will ask the question to the participant. So if you are able to drop your question and let me know who is the panelist that you would like to direct the question, it'll be great. If not, I will decide for you. Okay, so we will start the show right now. So the first question for the group: what does VUCA actually means to you? How should we manage the people strategy in this context of VUCA world? So maybe I will start with Sarah.
Thank you. So I think from my perspective, talking about a VUCA world, I think it's something that is not news when it comes to the situation where we are in right now. But of course, it's been amplified by the whole COVID situation that we are finding ourselves in. And I think that when this whole thing started 12 months ago, a lot of us just didn't expect for it to be lasting as long as it is lasting, right? So that kind of amplifies, I think, the whole context of VUCA and living in a VUCA world and what it is that we would like to accomplish in that. If I talk about it from a human resource perspective, and quite frankly then more from a European perspective, what has it meant to us? I think in any sense, when you talk about a people strategy, you have to make sure that you have a people strategy that's connected to the business strategy. And the business strategy will change over time, irregardless if you then happen to have a COVID virus or not in your world. But since that also happened, what really became sort of the challenge, I think, from an HR point of view, is to make sure that you cater for so many different cultures, so many different languages, so many different types of restrictions and governmental aspects. All of the countries in Europe are obviously having their own take on what does it mean for us as a company, as a country, as an economy, and that has been quite difficult in the context of operating in a global setting with maybe the same, of course, values, the same KPIs, the same structure from a company perspective, but operating then in so many different contexts around Europe. So that has led to some interesting conversations, of course, in the sense of how do we make sure that we both cater to the sense of security and complexity that this brings to the different countries and the different areas where we operate, but also maintaining at the same time a common people strategy and a common value structure and the common sense of business strategy and where we would like to move forward. And again, maybe not something new, but I think it's been amplified, like I said, in the COVID context, if that makes sense.
Right. Thank you very much for your sharing. I'd like to move over across to US. So Bushan, are you able to share from us perspective from the US?
Yeah, so I'm going to pick up the ambiguity and the uncertainty part of VUCA. So right now, I mean, markets love uncertainty. Markets hate uncertainty. Businesses hate uncertainty. We as individuals, whether we are employees or leaders or HR practitioners, uncertainty drives anxiety. Right now, we have economic uncertainty in many businesses. We have health uncertainty, even though that the vaccine is hopefully going to make that a distant memory this time next year. But we have all kinds of other uncertainty in terms of job security. What about schools reopening? And then certain businesses have uncertainty around their business models. So, you know, how will we travel again at scale for businesses? How do we kind of think about entertainment industries and theaters and sports industries? And I know that Laura's going to talk a little bit about the kind of the hospitality industry, but the uncertainty right now, I think what businesses are doing is focusing on what they control. So for some businesses, it's how do I repair my balance sheet? How do I think about cash? How do I think about government stimulus if I've got demand that's down? And other businesses saying, how do I manage my people's workload? If I'm a technology firm or a cybersecurity professional, how do I manage people's workload, or a banking professional working, you know, a number of hours? So wherever we look at this, it starts with the business in terms of the uncertainty and the markets and the stakeholders. But human resource professionals here on the call absolutely have a big role in being the voice of the employee and all the other stakeholders in addressing and focusing on what they could do, whether that's financial, whether that's around the business or around the people agenda.
Great, thank you, Bushan, for your sharing. So since I hear that you have called Laura name, so maybe I'll hand over to Laura.
Great, thank you. First, I want to say I'm not being defiant by not having the same background. Apparently, when I clicked on it, it set off alarms to our IT team and they locked me out of my account, so I'm afraid to touch it. I think to talk a little bit about hospitality in particular, you know, if you think about it, every time there's a crisis, starting 9/11, the recession, whatever it may be, because we rely on expendable income, we seem to be hit the hardest whenever there's any sort of incident or issue, either nationally in the US or many times internationally. It could be China, whatever's happening. So I think we're kind of used to living in somewhat of a VUCA world because of the changes and roller coasters we do go through. So I think, that's one thing about hospitality. I think from a US perspective as well, there's a lot of talk about technology, right? The fourth revolution, industrial revolution, where more technology will take over than people to do the jobs. I think the pandemic has expedited that to some degree. Hospitality has typically lagged behind when it comes to technology because of that whole customer service, people right first, servicing others. So I think hospitality will have to spend some time catching up with technology. And from a human resources perspective, I think a lot of lessons learned, and what's critical is organizations really need to spend time looking at their purpose as we move forward, maybe redefining what your purpose is and re-articulate it to your employees, because I think after this pandemic, employee expectations have changed, exponentially, and that's critical. Kind of piggybacking on what Sarah said, right? You have your people strategy, you align it with your business strategy. It's probably a good time to go back and look at your culture, your purpose, because employees are going to demand more empathetic leaders moving forward.
Right. Okay. So I would like to hand over to Lawrence across the globe from US. Lawrence, over to you.
Yeah, Eddie and I coming from Asia. So likewise, like another part of the world, that this pandemic has actually created a perfect storm for VUCA. So we in Malaysia, we have, I work in a conglomerate which we have 100 over companies. So some sectors like hospitalities badly hit. There are a few sectors are doing well, but then overall people have different responses. Business are down, government are coming out from policies and after policies, and also you have people are restless, and there's so many things that we have never experienced in our life as happening now, even until today. So what would be the responses for the business, like especially in HR? First, the HR seems to be helping the business to drive this in these really uncharted territories. Like I remember that whenever new policy come out from the government, overnight the HR had to answer millions of questions from the business leaders. And from my side, I'm in charge of organization development and learning. So we need to quickly actually embarking in the digital journey, from the onboarding, from the mini workshop, and the leadership program. And in Asia, many of us are not so versatile in terms of digital experience. Like many of us do not like to do like online learning, unlike in the Europe and the US is a norm. But here begin to force too. I mean, it's like, and they have to pick up the skill in order to do the video conferences, the online learning. These are really a big impact, especially for the older generation. Sometimes they don't even have the equipment. Sometimes they also do not have the know-how, it's not in their DNA or in the habit to do it. But because of this VUCA, the situation that we are in, many of us begin to get use of it. We have classes to teach them how to use it, things like that. So it's a huge change, but somewhere also help us in learning, embark into the e-learning journey. Back to you,
right,
Eddie.
thank you for all your input. I think I also want to add in a little bit from my perspective as well. I was a HR practitioner, and then I moved on to a management role, and I'm also doing quite a fair bit of consulting. So I just finished my consulting work this afternoon, Singapore time. And it's very interesting that when I have the conversation with the company, they are actually pretty excited about the VUCA world because they see a lot of opportunity. So what I'm trying to bring across is that while Busan is very right to say that we all hated VUCA uncertainty, but I'll say that if we are able to see opportunities from the business perspective or even from HR perspective, we are able to move on to the next level. So this is probably what I want to summarize for the whole discussion in our group meeting, in our group session. So now I want to start off with the individual question to the respective panelists. So again, I will start with the lady, Laura. So can you share with us from just on what you are saying, okay? I would like to pick up from what you are sharing. How should we actually be agile and maintain a positive impact? What needs to be kept and what needs to be changed?
Great. Well, you know, I think to me, being agile creates a positive impact. I think lessons learned again from the last year, our employees like being empowered. When you look at these big corporations, we tend to get caught up in the analysis paralysis. I could even see our organization sometimes heading back to that, where when you're in the middle of a crisis, you seem to be able to make decisions quickly, implement quickly. And then I don't know what happens, right? The crisis is now not ending, but slowing down, and we're going back to old habits. So I think, you know, it's important to take a look at your culture. You may have to redefine your culture. We're actually doing that here at MGM Resorts, doing an assessment of the health of our culture. And one of the things we want to build in after the overall assessment is keeping this agility so we don't go back to the old habits that we have. Because it slows you down from a business perspective. And I think, you know, Bhushan spoke a little bit about that, right? The business world, right? It's not great when we have this type of crisis, but if we can learn the lessons from it from a business perspective, it would only help the markets and businesses recover faster.
Right, Laura, so maybe can you elaborate about a little bit about your industry? So because today's session is not just to talk about the theory, but we really want to hear from your practical experience so that you're able to really help the hospitality industry. So can you share with us, like, what is your recommendation, or what have you done in your own organization that you intend to keep and what you intend to actually change?
Sure. And just a little bit about MGM Resorts. For those of you that don't know, pre-COVID, we had 68,000 employees nationally and close to 80,000 internationally, all across the US, about 27 properties altogether, right? Casino, gaming, resorts. We ended up shutting down every property we owned, laying off 94% of our employee population. Right now, we're still sitting at about 30,000 employees that we have active, and slowly as things open up, we're bringing people back. And again, what we're doing as an executive committee and team is really spending time reevaluating, taking that step back. And when we notice that habits that we're picking up, first of all, calling each other out. But then, like I stated, organizationally, we want to look at it. So we've engaged with a company to do an employee survey, focus groups, just talk to our employees about, you know, what kind of worked over this last year, and then how should we move forward. And we may even end up changing some of our core values and just how we do business in general. So we're kind of in the middle of that assessment right now because we don't want to go backwards. Funny story, we had a 12 to 18 month plan to install remote check-in, right, and digital keys. We were able to do that in every single one of our properties where we have hotel rooms in 2 months. So it kind of shows you how bureaucracy can really stretch things out, but when you're really pushed, you can make changes quickly.
Right. Okay, Laura, thank you for sharing. So we have heard from a HR practitioner. So now I would like to ask Bhushan, can you share with us from an employee perspective and also from a HR perspective, what is your advice to us? And how, I will ask this first question and then I'll follow up with the next question.
Yeah, so the first thing, and I love Laura's story about the confidence to engage in that digital journey. The digital key was done in a matter of weeks out of necessity. what we need in a crisis is confidence. So we released, we poll CEOs for the last 24 years. We've released a CEO survey. This year, we actually released it today in March. 5,000 plus CEOs around the world, all industries. Surprisingly, maybe to this audience, there's a lot of confidence out there. There's big confidence in terms of the rest of this year and next year, in terms of growth, what they can control, even some of the policy agenda. It doesn't mean that there are not risks. There are cyber risks out there. There are risks of tax and trade tariffs. There's environmental risk. We've just seen that with the terrible incident, the terrible weather patterns and the impacts in Texas here in the US. But the confidence that business communities need to have to say, how do I rebuild my business? How do I get customers back safely if I'm in human contact type businesses? How do I reopen offices in a safe way based on safety and preference, especially in 2021 when we haven't got the vaccines out at scale? So I think it's confidence. And as Laura described, HR has a big role in being a student of the business. Really understand what the business needs, what the business trends are, what consumers are saying, what the research is saying, what the health experts are saying, but they also need to be a voice of the employee. So not moving back too quickly to offices if employees are not comfortable, not mandating vaccines if employees or customers are not comfortable. So whatever those procedures are, I think we've got to really kind of, the advice to HR practitioners out there and leaders is both of those, which I think by and large, I've seen HR professionals do really well. Engage with the business, look at the data, be the voice of the employee and the other stakeholders in your ecosystem.
Right. I actually received a message from Steve Lewis, and he made a very interesting statement, which I fully agree that VUCA can be an advantage. Necessity is the mother of invention. So, and sometimes without something to push us, we will be too relaxed. We'll just sit behind and hopefully things gets by and wait for our successor to roll it out. But if something hit us right now, a crisis hit us right now, we will have to get up and do the dirty work ourselves. So probably this is the best chance for us to make an impact in our company and in our work. So Bushan, I also want to ask you about diversity and inclusion, because this has been a hot topic, not just in US, but this has been a hot topic now coming even towards in Asia. So I would like to get a little bit perspective from you.
Yeah, and I think Laura mentioned purpose. Many organizations through the pandemic have had to demonstrate and have demonstrated a sense of purpose, whether it's around retaining jobs, whether it's around racial equity here in the US after the terrible George Floyd incident, which then reverberated around the world in terms of how do we drive equity with Indigenous communities in Australia? How do we make sure that we're not having discrimination or anti-bullying in places like London you've seen recently? So whether we like it or not, discrimination is on the rise. Divisiveness in the workplace and the world is on the rise. There's polarization on different views, political in the workplace, the speed of reopening, whether we wear masks or not. So it's a really important time to bring people along and also think about equity. Think about the equity of the remote worker who's going to be stigmatized maybe next year if you have an in-office culture. Think about the equity of the women who are leaving the workforce, who are essential workers because they cannot do their jobs from home and they have to homeschool their children because schools are not open. So wherever we look around the world, wherever we look in industries, the business community and the HR leaders, again, back to the voice of the employee, have a big responsibility here to kind of make sure that we're not talking about inclusion and equity without executing it in either our benefit strategy or our business plans or our reopening plans. And I think that's a real risk as we're living in this hybrid world. And as some sectors are struggling and we have a K-shaped recovery and the markets are going high and the M&A transactions are going high, yet we have a risk that a number of employees, a number of workers could potentially be left behind in different sectors and different parts of the world.
Right, okay. So thank you for sharing. So now I'm going to move across to Europe. So I would like to hear perspective from the European side. from Sarah, and she's going to share with us a little bit her views about leaders. So we have heard from Laura, that is representing a company, an industry, and then we heard from Bhushan representing the consulting world, and right now we want to hear from Laura about her perspective about leaders. So how should leader, in your perspective, how should leader actually lead in this VUCA world? And what can leaders bring to the table in this VUCA world?
Thank you, Eddie. I think that for me, much to what Laura was saying and also what Bhushan was saying, it's not that the demands of a certain topic has changed, it's just been amplified. So again, I think we've always looked for leadership that is genuine, leadership that is human and role modeling in the sense that it's a person that you would like to follow. And I think that hasn't really changed in this particular setting, the amplified VUCA setting or whatever you want to call it, but rather it's just been stronger. So I think for us right now, with the rolling back to what Bhushan was saying in the sense of diversity and the sense of that we have a risk of certain people falling behind due to technology advances or due to different certain jobs disappearing, but also fear. I mean, a VUCA context, yes, it also is the mother of invention, like one of our attendees said, but it's also a really strong ground for fear. And the more fear you have, the more polarized we become. So I think from a leadership perspective, you need to be really clear on what is the purpose of your particular company? What is the culture? What kind of company would you like to be? Who would you like to be remembered as? And to be able to create that from a leadership perspective, I think that is super important in the VUCA context that we're talking about today. It's been important before, but now I'm saying it's super important.
Right. So Sarah, I'm trying to put you on the spot. Can you share with us your experience in your organization? So how do you actually lead your leaders? How can your leaders, so give us practical examples.
Right. So I'm thinking, you mean from an HR perspective, what we can support with in the sense of leadership?
No, that would be the next question. That will be
the next question. Okay.
Yes.
So what am I actually doing? Thank you. I think that what I am doing will tie into the next question because I am an HR professional, but I think from a company perspective then, okay, so what can you do from a company perspective and what have we been doing? We've, number one, made sure that everyone who can work remotely is working remotely and to make sure that they actually have the technology to be able to do so. And from a leadership perspective, it changes the way that you connect to your people, right? So we've had sessions with all of our leaders, making sure that they understand how do you connect in a virtual setting? How do you make sure that you keep contact with your employees in a virtual setting when you're not meeting over a coffee or when you're not meeting when you're going to customers and so on and so forth? How do you make sure that you keep connected? Also having in mind that since this particular VUCA context also has an impact on your family, meaning your personal setting, that in a lot of cases we have parents whose children are not going to school. So everyone is actually in one house or one apartment with crappy Wi-Fi and not enough digital tools to be able to make your entirety go round, right? How do you make sure that from a leadership perspective, you support that? Not only in pushing for productivity from your employees, but also understanding from a human perspective, what does this mean for you as for your employees as human beings, to be honest. I think all of us have been on various Zooms, Teams, or whatever meetings where you have a little dog walking by or a little cat or a little person. You know, I think I've heard leaders in every language ever possible interrupting a meeting going like, hang on a second, in whatever language to a smaller person of that household, right? And it just makes us more human. But as a leader, you have to be strong enough to recognize that both myself, but also my employees can be both very productive, but also very vulnerable at the same time. And I think that is an amazing thing that we are seeing right now.
Right.
Does that
So
make
I
sense?
actually like your last statement that we can be vulnerable and yet be able to contribute to our organization
Absolutely.
as well. Yeah. So before I ask the next question to you, I would like to ask a very quick question. Is this people strategy driven by HR or is it driven by your CEO, the management in general?
Both. Needs to be
key
both.
responsible for that?
Well, ultimately, I am key responsible for creating the people strategy, but that will never fly unless I'm connected with my business partner, right? So if we have a business strategy like we do, there is no way on earth that I can create a people strategy that is not connected to that, because then I'm creating something just because I believe from an HR perspective that it's great. And then I'm ignoring the most important word if you are a support function, which is stakeholder management. There is nothing you can do on your own. You need to make sure that your stakeholders in the particular business is with you. And in my case, that happens to be the leaders.
Right. So I hear the word connection with the leaders or the leaders with you. So now I'm going to go into the second question for you. How would you as a HR leader lead the leaders? Give me practical experience. Give me practical things that you do. Yeah.
For sure. So I think practically, I think our job is to enable our leaders to be just the things that I just said that people are asking for, right? So what does that mean? It means also being a role model. It means, recognizing that in a meeting that we just had, one of my very senior leaders didn't really behave like him or herself at that particular setting. And I picked that up and I made sure that I gave him or her a call afterwards just to say, you know what, are you okay? What's going on? And it turns out that it was something personal that had happened to that particular person that we dealt with and that I could support with from an HR perspective. It's also making sure that you remind leaders that remember that people will not automatically maybe reach out to you. You need to schedule whatever it is that you need to schedule to make sure that you keep in contact with your employees. It's making sure that leaders can be, the best version of themselves. That is our job from an HR perspective. An HR leader, my job is not to lead per se, but it's to create great leadership within our company culture. And that is what I think that we can support with. And it's also about being what we said before. It's about being brave, it's about being genuine, and it's about being vulnerable. And if I can role model that and show that to my senior leaders, they will also mirror that behavior. So I think we're all responsible for creating that type of culture. HR is not solely responsible for a culture. I'm responsible for making sure that we get where we're supposed to be going from a culture perspective. But I don't carry the culture in a company. All of us do.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to spare you for this moment. I'm going to now move my gun over and shoot Lawrence. Okay, so Lawrence, I'm going to aim you right now. Okay, so can you share with us a little bit from Asia perspective and also for L&D perspective? So what kind of changes that L&D need to put in place in this VUCA world?
Yeah, I think being in the learning leaders for many years, I think these changes is, I would say, is really unexpected. But as I have worked in multinational company for many years, this somehow also not so, it's not something new for me. So in this context, that I think as a L&D, first you need to move things to the digital on face-to-face classroom. As Berjaya, Berjaya Corporation, we run a kind of leadership school where we have 14 months program for the general manager, 8 months for the manager, and executive for 6 to 7 months, things like that. So it's pretty engaging, and also we wanted to move the culture where we have the common understanding of management, skill and practices. So, but when this thing come, we had to move from face-to-face to online. So that would be, for the learning leader, you need to actually begin to prepare. First, I think is the technologies wise. For example, that your equipment must be actually equipped for them to like even as simple as video camera, even a Wi-Fi. You must make sure the infrastructure is there. Secondly, also in the L&D perspective is that you need to look into the trainer you have or the consultant, even in our team, when we begin to deliver message through like onboarding, to mini workshop, to public program, to even like as simple as anti-corruption acts, things like that. We begin to have to learn a new skill to facilitate online facilitation, so and online training. So the third thing is that we are also to begin to move some processes into or put digital content move into online for people to easy access. For example, like performance management processes, for even like training processes. We begin to make video and PowerPoint made into step by step and made into a PDF so that people can access. They don't need to call us that often. So then, of course, most important thing in terms of strategies. Strategy, we begin to look into like less context and then more virtual, and then the team need to be trained into how to conduct their work in a remote area. So these are also one of the areas where L&D is supposed to look into, so that we can equip our employee and also our stakeholder, because they're also at the same time fighting for the survival of the business. So we need to rethink the whole subject that we are going to deliver. No longer, those that wish to have, but rather it's a survival skill, how to use Zoom, or how do you even facilitate conference. I think these are becoming more and more important in this VUCA world.
So Lawrence, I'm going to dig a little bit deeper. I'm going to ask you a little bit about AI and AR and VR. So the thing is, in your opinion, how do you think that we can, from an L&D perspective, trying to put this in place?
Yeah, this thing that you talk about need a lot of investment upfront in the hardware, of course also in the software as well. I think they'll be very interesting because like VR, you make the learning, make the learning very practical. Like for example, Walmart are using like things like that to train the people. I thought that would be very good if we can go into it, because in the Berjaya we have subsidiary like Starbucks and Canyon Roger. These are the F&B hotel. If they can use VR, they can train. We can train our employee faster, because they now can use VR, even something like gamification, to learn the skill in a very immersed way. So I thought that would be another direction that the learning should take a serious look about this. Then I think the winners of the business is those who can learn faster. The speed of learning is the winner in the business landscape to me. So how we can help the employee and even the business leader to make the critical skill, current skill and future competency, to make in a different form, like using the AI, the VR, gamification, to make the learning faster, and we get ahead of the market. I think that is definitely a good thing to do.
Right. So Lawrence, so back to your organization, Berjaya, can you share with us how are you into this process that you talk about, AR, VR, and all this? Have you already embarked on this journey? And maybe if yes, are you able to share with us? If not, then how are you going to get the buy-in from your stakeholders? Yeah,
we started with the business intelligence in analysis for our HR processes first. And then to look into the area where we can make the most of our investment in healthcare, and also even in the in the leave, things like that. We begin to look into because we have about 14,000 people, so they are scattered around, under our businesses. So we need to look into how do we optimize that. So this is the first step we are doing. We haven't embarked into like but we do started in the gamification for our coaching, and also Starbucks also embarked in part of our subsidiary is the engagement to with the store manager in terms of their work, for example, how many skills they pick up. So, but moving forward, I think that we may want to look into like using gamification and also using the, I think VR will be maybe 2 to 3 years later, not for now.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you for sharing. So now we left with about 20 minutes. Initially, we want to set aside about 30 minutes for Q&A, but it's okay. I think we have so much good example that we are sharing, and the speaker can go on days and days to talk about the examples they're sharing. So, but right now we would like to move on to the Q&A segment. So any of your of the attendees, do you have any burning question that you would like to ask the panelists? Okay, I give you all some time to do the typing, but I will start off with one question that I would like to bring to the team. So, Bushan, just now you did mention about anxiety. Okay, so I thought that this is very good time for us to jump in to talk about anxiety. How do we actually link managing anxiety in this people strategy? And then how do we build resilience? Because the COVID are creating crisis to us, but I think that we should be looking at something that is more positive about building resilience rather than just trying to react to the situation. So we are trying to respond positively to the situation. So how can we respond positively by building resilience and advising how the employees managing anxiety?
Yep. I would say on anxiety, it's really important for companies to measure it and really compare how their people are feeling with their management teams compared to their management teams. When we've done our research, there's a disconnect between the level of well-being that a company feels, that the business leaders feel that their people have, versus their employees. We did a survey where 70% of business leaders said they've changed their benefits plans, they've customized them for their employees, and it's by and large been successful. Only 30% of those same employees actually said they were actually helping them in getting their work done. So I think measurement's really important. What Lawrence said around taking action is so critical. So Lawrence, I love your point around you can actually reskill yourself out of a crisis. So important in different sectors. I was reading a report this morning that pilots in the airline industry that have been furloughed or haven't got a lot of hours are reskilling themselves to work across different sectors. They're taking the initiative. It's a good, positive story. And they're working in areas from healthcare to construction. And I think that's important. And I think the focus on what you can control as a business leader or as an HR leader to say, can we provide access to training? Training is going to be a really important solution. We did some research with the World Economic Forum that was published last month, where we basically said, if you get your reskilling plans right, and if governments work with businesses around the world, we can actually create 5.3 million jobs across different sectors. So it's not just a doomsday scenario where we're all kind of stuck in this way. I think there's positives around learning new skills, trade skills, digital skills, leadership skills, changing, and partnering with education. So I think anxiety gets controlled by direct actions. I think reskilling is a huge area where business leaders and HR leaders on this call can help their organizations take the lead and see the benefits.
Right. Bushan, just now you mentioned the pilot is very interesting because in Singapore, and when we were hit by the COVID, of course, the aviation industry is the first one that gotten the biggest hit on them. And then what happened is the Singapore Airlines, together with the government, came up with a strategy to redeploy the air crew into the healthcare. And so they work side by side with the nurses. And I can tell you that we have very good experience. So my grandfather was hospitalized during the period of time. And then this is the first time that I see aircrew serving my grandfather with an excellent customer service. I was like, are we on the plane or are we in the hospital? And all of us are actually saying, can we have the aircrew to take care of our grandfather together with the nurse? So I think that this creates a lot of opportunity for us to reskill and upskill. So
Great story.
Laura,
Great
so
story, yes.
yes, Laura, so over to you. I would like to hear a little bit about your industry, because you are hospitality is also another one that hit badly during the COVID time. So how do you actually help your organization to build resilience?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we spent a lot of time talking about that. You know, I think a lot of it, in the midst of it, we actually launched an accelerated development program for our high potentials, realizing as our organization flattened, right, as a result, you know, most organizations just from a survive had to do that. So really concentrating on those high potentials and ensuring that they have the skills such as agility, resilience, and so forth, especially just to move across different verticals within the business. So that's one thing that we're doing and will continue to do and push deeper into the organization. I think that's really important. And then I was just IMing Bhushan because we're creating our reskilling, upskilling kind of platform. And what will that look like? Because as we've been talking about with technology, some jobs may go away, other jobs may appear, or if someone's truly needs new skills, how do we, you know, kind of get them ready? Because I love the example of, right, Singapore Airlines, hospitality employees are versatile. I shouldn't say that because I don't want y'all to hire them away. But they are very versatile and can do multiple things. And, you know, number one, when you're sick and in a hospital or whatever it may be, care facility, you want to be treated well. No matter where you go, what business, you want to be treated well. And that's something hospitality employees get, you know, 100%. I think that's a wonderful example. I love that.
Right. Okay, so I'm also trying to get perspective from maybe even Sarah and Lawrence. I actually do know that in Japan, they actually have a legislation to actually make sure that they identify who are the employees who are stressed. And it is by law that if the employee is stressed, they need to go through an assessment, and then the company is supposed to come up with some solution initiative to actually help the individual. Do you think that this is necessary, like, just like D&I in US that is included in the reporting?
So can I take that?
Yes.
I think that it's super interesting that Japan is also mentioned in this context, because I was thinking about both what Bhushan and Laura was saying in the sense of what is the responsibility from an employer versus what is the responsibility of the individual. Because if you're building resilience, I think it's really important that you're trying to find a balance between what can I do as an employer versus what is it that you have to do also as an individual. And the individual is a lot trickier because that comes with the context of both where you were born, from a cultural perspective, but also from your what type of family were you raised in, how do you talk about mental illness or mental health, and what do you bring to the table in terms of an individual coming into my context in terms of an employer. And I think that my responsibility as an employer is to make sure that I create a culture where it's okay to be vulnerable, where it's okay to speak about mental health, and where it's okay to be open about whatever is going on in your life. And it's also my responsibility to make sure that I kind of create almost like a buffet of things that is clearly connected both to the healthcare of that particular country or site where you're working, but also that's connected to the culture of the company. That is my sort of responsibility. From an individual responsibility, it's also, if I speak about myself as Sarah, okay, what do I bring to the table when I come to work on a daily basis? what works for me? How do I build my own resilience when it comes to managing stress and anxiety? And the things that work for me are most likely not the same things that are going to work for Bhushan or for Lawrence or Laura or you, Eddie. So I think it's really important as an employer, you kind of cater for a choice of things, but then as an individual, you also have to make sure that you do what you need to do to build your own resilience, because there needs to be that balance for me. And to go back to your example of Japan, then why do I think that that's really interesting? Well, it's interesting from a point of view that Japanese culture is known for not sharing when you are not feeling great. And it's also one of the countries with the highest suicide rate, which is obviously super, the worst you can go, right, in that direction. And for them to kind of legislate their way out of it, I think is interesting. And I think that's maybe an extreme that you have to go to if you find yourself in that particular context. But I also think, again, I want to iterate that don't forget the balance between what you can do as an employer versus what the individual kind of needs to do from that context.
Right. So yes, I just want to deep dive a little bit to ask the question of the responsibility of the government. So because we talk about Japan is a legislation, so do you think that this is going to be helpful, or will it actually come back and bite on us?
I think that is extremely difficult to answer unless you're Japanese, because it's like the no, but I'm, you know, yes. I think I'm Swedish, right? So from a Swedish perspective, there's a lot of things that are going on in the sense of, you know, our schools for smaller children have stayed open longer than the rest of Europe. We have a different view of what constitutes a family and what kind of support do you get. What's the cost of daycare, which is extremely low in Sweden, but we pay for it with taxes. So I mean, for somebody then from the outside to come and say, okay, Sweden, you have to do so and so and so, I think that's extremely difficult. And I think it's also getting on a freaking high horse saying that, you know, you need to do whatever you need to do. So do I believe that the legislation can support? Yes, absolutely. But I believe that that legislation cannot be the same for the entire world because we operate in very different contexts.
Right. So thank you for sharing your perspective. Lawrence, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, our side there, during this time, we actually have some of the, in terms of the well-being and stress, we did, in fact, in many occasions, invited either a psychologist or a mental toughness consultant to share with us. Plus, we also, because we have our company have a huge gym. So in that context, we always carry out some of the activity in the gym. And I think recently in the last 1.5 years, we begin to look into some flexi hour for the mothers. They can come in at 5:30, 9:30 or 9:30 to 10, and then they go back, you know, a bit later. So these are the things that we are doing, but we also know that the stress that people are experiencing, especially about the job securities and also stress from the family, all this stuff. So we are still, you know, looking into this area to make the employees feeling better. So it's still yeah.
Okay, so we have a very interesting question coming from one of the attendees. So the question, let me summarize, is really to talk about how do we balance the reskilling program with employee fear. It could be a fear of being laid off, or it can be a fear of being burned out. So how do we balance that? So any of the panelists, do you like to take the question?
Maybe I'll start. I'd say it's going to be different in different situations. You can't upskill if people have a fear and anxiety. So if I'm worried about my job, I just want to keep my job and I want to hang on and I want to execute whatever tasks and I haven't got time to learn new things. If I create an environment where you encourage me to learn 20% of my time and you give me time for rest and and ideation and learning and experimentation, I'm going to be much more open to it. If you're just adding things to my plate and say, go learn this new technology or go learn this new augmented reality that we're putting into the market, there is going to be a heightened sense of fear. So I think it's going to be different for different people at different situations. The point on measurement, I just want to pick up on Sarah and Lawrence's point. I do think that the pandemic has highlighted that you cannot come into Sweden and tell them how to measure their country's health or or company's health. But I do think as HR practitioners and consultants, we need to be pushing our businesses to say, if you don't have a balanced set of measures now, you never will. So you cannot talk about purpose and profit in the same way. You can't optimize both. And so at some points, we've got to have a discussion to say, if we talk about stakeholder capitalism, are we really going to measure carbon footprint in a different way? Are we going to measure employee skill development? And are we going to put dollars aside to actually upskill people in our company because it's the right thing for the company and therefore your society? And yes, there's a question on who funds that. Is it the company or government? But we're seeing that in a number of companies where we're saying we've got to reset how we measure everything from the financial markets, how we value companies, how we pay people, and therefore kind of the measures that different firms have and disclose.
Completely agree.
And I think there's a lot of, not to get too far off topic, there's a lot in the US, there's a lot of government money out there that can be used for reskilling that most corporations don't know or utilize. I've created programs. Just recently, we didn't have enough table games dealers in our property in the Washington, D.C. area. So my workforce development person went to one of the workforce agencies and they paid to train people to become table games dealers. So it's out there. You just have to be creative and really dedicate time. And I think when it comes to the fear, organizationally, I think we get afraid sometimes to be so transparent with our employees because we're afraid they'll leave. Because where we've implemented new technology, we've hoped they picked up the hint, right, that perhaps they should do something. And I think leaders will also just have to be more transparent in their communication, sitting down with them and saying, your job's going to go away. But we've provided these resources to either find a new area, maybe learn how to program what the technology is, and be a little more honest in our communication instead of dropping hints like sometimes leaders like to do.
Right. Okay. So, Laura, thanks for sharing. So, for the participant, if you do not know how to tap into the government grant, please reach out to Laura and she will be most happy to guide you. So we have somebody who is able to give us practical way of utilizing government money and helping our workforce. Okay, so we have left with 3 minutes. So I do not see any more questions, but I would like to close this session with asking the panelists, give us one takeaway that we should remember. So starting with Sarah.
Main takeaway, make sure that you as an HR professional support the balance between company building resilience and individuals building resilience towards VUCA, whatever that means in your context.
Right. So over to you, Bhushan.
Make sure that all of your talent processes are VUCA ready. And so we've talked about learning, but can you hire at scale? Can you transition significant people out of an organization where they be contingent workers? Can you reward people for crisis management type work? Do you have the right workforce planning and data to even understand how do you kind of manage people in and out? Do you have the right well-being programs in place to manage the anxiety? So really take a look at your talent programs to make sure that they are VUCA compliant. Don't wait for the next VUCA moment or the next crisis.
Right. How about Laura?
I think somewhat similar. You can't pick up from 2019 and just keep doing what you were doing back then. You have to go back, look at your people strategy, your business strategy. This was a human crisis and HR is still leading the way if we so choose. So don't go back to old habits. You have to readjust how you do business.
Right. Okay. And lastly, from Lawrence.
Yeah, I think you have to align to the critical business need, because that's where the burning issue for the business leader. The HR, either learning or different part of the HR function, should listen to their needs and then try to fulfill as much as possible, but not forgetting to drive the talent as mentioned by Busan as well. Because there will be, there will be emphasis on current needs. Sometimes they forget about the future planning of the talent pipeline.
Right. So everybody, we have come to the end of this session. We are just nice that we hit the end of the session.